Hello and welcome to the podcast. In this episode, I wanted to talk about freedom of speech, or a potential lack thereof, or at least the potential for the Overton window in terms of freedom of speech to be shrinking beyond a point where any of us might feel comfortable to say anything at all. I don't know about you, but I worry that we're getting ourselves into a position where it's difficult, if perhaps not possible, and certainly may not be advisable, to make a joke, to have a laugh, to express a different opinion or an opinion that isn't approved. To begin, let me tell you about yesterday. Yesterday, I was in Oxford and I was giving a talk about leadership. And essentially, the gist of the talk was that it's important for a leader to create an environment where everyone feels safe to speak up, to say, hey, I have a different opinion, or I think maybe that's a mistake, or I made a mistake. And there would be no repercussions. It was a safe environment. And I think that is a good thing for people to experience and for leaders to set up and maintain. So that got me thinking broadly about how that leadership example sits alongside present day public discourse. And I wondered whether we're actually affording ourselves the same ability to speak up and for it to be safe. Because I was south in Oxford, I realised that if I travelled a little bit further south, then I could have met up with a couple of my closest friends who I love to bits. And if we had met up, then I probably would have said to them something like, well, how are you two soft southerners doing? And they might have said, well, we would reply, but you probably wouldn't be able to hear us because of all the layers of clothing and the hat and duffel coat that you've got on, Nanook of the North. Now, I wasn't actually wearing all that, but the joke is that I'm from the frozen north, and hence it's Nanook of the North. And they are softies because they're from the south. And we probably don't really believe that stuff, at least not all the time. But it's possible, I believe this to be the case, that if somebody had listened to that interaction, they could have said, well, I'm offended because I think you offended that individual. It was Nanookist, or that was Southernism, or something, and reported it. And again, as I understand it, depending on certain circumstances and to whom it was reported, etc., it could have been investigated. And the recent case that has been in the public eye, I want to talk about because it is quite chilling. Parents arrested after complaining about school in WhatsApp group. And you might think, wait a minute, a WhatsApp group? Well, a private WhatsApp group complaining about a school? Yeah, they were arrested. A mum and dad said they were locked up for 11 hours after they complained about the recruitment process at their daughter's school on WhatsApp. I can just step back and think about that. They were arrested after complaining about the recruitment process on a WhatsApp group, a private one as it turned out. Maxie Allen and Rosalind Levine were arrested on suspicion of harassment and malicious communications at their home on January 29 this year, 2025. 5 weeks later, Hertfordshire police confirmed there was no case against them. Video footage shows the moment the pair were led away by 6 police officers in front of their crying 3-year-old daughter, Francesca. And that's pretty grim. So the first thing I would say is 6 police officers. I believe that one of the more senior police officers has said that was probably not right. 6 people. I don't blame the police here. They're told, look, this is what you've got to do in this situation. We don't know what to expect, and so they go in and do what they need to do. Could it have been done differently? Absolutely. Should it have been done? Well, I'll let you decide. let's actually listen to Maxie Allen. I'm going to play you 2 or 3 snippets from a recent podcast that he was being interviewed in. I'll put a link to the full podcast in the description. It's much longer, and I think it's very worthwhile listening to and watching if you are interested in this area. But here's snippet number 1.
We were never charged.
Yeah.
We were arrested on suspicion primarily of malicious communications and harassment. And to take them in turn, where it all started was messages on a parent's private WhatsApp group. And the backstory to that sounds a little bit arcane, but I have to explain it so it makes sense. I used to be a governor of this school, a primary school. I was a parent governor for 4 years. So I took quite a close interest in how it was run. I sort of knew the workings and I knew how things were meant to be done. And there was shortly after I stood down from the board at the end of my term, there was a bit of contention around the replacement of the head teacher.
So this isn't someone who is just wildly making accusations. This is someone who's intelligent. This is someone who's educated. This is someone who knew something about the mechanisms behind the scenes. And it's about the replacement of a head teacher. 6 police officers, that's how this ended up. But let's go on and listen some more to Maxie Allen.
So I wrote to the chair of governors and essentially said, can you explain why you're doing it that way? What's the rationale? When are you going to advertise it? Her replies, in my opinion, she might disagree, were rather evasive. And when somebody who's running an organisation is evasive, then you tend to ask more questions, not fewer. I wrote another letter to all the governors saying, please try and get a grip on this. And I posted that letter to our parents' WhatsApp group, which was a group set up by Rosalind, my partner. It was a private WhatsApp group of about 12 to 15 parents, mainly mums in my daughter's class. So it was not official. It wasn't part of the school mechanisms. Mm-hmm. It was just essentially a group of friends in a private conversation as we saw it.
So he's questioning the mechanism. He's questioning the efficiency, the efficacy, the way things are done. And the discussion is in a private WhatsApp group with not a lot of people in it who appear, it would seem, to have a vested interest. They want the best for the school. They want the best for the kids. What's wrong with that? Let's go on.
We were a bit narky about how that process was being run, and an important point to make is that neither at the time nor later or by the police were we ever presented with any examples of supposedly malicious communications, WhatsApps or anything. We were never given a piece of paper and said, you said that, and that is criminal, or that is out of order. We were never shown an actual example.
And so they were presented with nothing. Nothing. There was nothing malicious that they had written, it would seem. But still, they were arrested and held for several hours in separate cells. And one of the grandparents had to be called by the police to come down and look after this young child. This seems horrendous. It's a WhatsApp group, a private WhatsApp group about a school, and they're expressing concern about that school, or at least the mechanisms of this recruitment process and how it's being done. How then did they find themselves in that situation? What is going on?
The spiciest ones we can find were my partner referring to one senior person at the school as a control freak and to another as they don't know much about anything.
A control freak, and they don't know much about anything. Wow. If that is the spiciest thing as it is described, my goodness, I've written worse. I've said worse. I'm sure you have as well. So if that was known by the school, the content of that WhatsApp group was known, isn't it then odd that the police agreed to go and investigate? Or did they just have to presume because there was this complaint? And again, to be balanced, maybe the school didn't know. Maybe someone exaggerated what was in the WhatsApp group, the private group, what was written there. Maybe. And maybe the exaggeration caused the school to call the police. But even so, doesn't this all sound a little bit Orwellian? And I think it was actually Maxie Allen who described it as Kafkaesque. It's so peculiar. And again, however, I must say, if they didn't turn up for an interview that they were meant to, then one can see there was already a bit of escalation. But still, I would counter that by saying, I think that was a phone call or a visit by someone to say, you need to do this, otherwise this will happen. Maybe that was communicated to them and we're not party to it, but it doesn't seem to be. It just seems to have been out of the blue, this arrest, and also because of what they had written. And what they had written when it was analysed does not seem to be anything at all. A control freak, for goodness sake. So this tendency, the tripwires to set off the alarms and the traps and the klaxons based on, I think, an extremely low threshold that certainly is not what I was describing yesterday in Oxford, where people are allowed to have opinions and speak up. The fact that we find ourselves in this climate, in this world right now, is, I believe, deeply concerning. And again, that direction of travel, in my opinion, is all wrong. Because what I would also add in there is that are we not only really using some kind of legislation in the wrong way and making people extremely fearful or trepidatious in terms of speaking up, which is wrong for all sorts of reasons, we're also getting people into the mindset that it's okay to say I was offended, or I'm offended because I think that person was offended. So what? You know, if it's not inciting violence or whatever, then we're offended. Maybe we need to consider resilience and the ability to just sort of get on with things and let some of those words and statements bounce off. Once more, I will balance that by saying that some things I believe are awful and shouldn't be said, and some things are quite patently in the criminal zone, and those things, well, those situations, they need to be dealt with appropriately, of course. But we need to remind ourselves this country is a country where humour is highly valued, and part of humour is kind of taking the mickey and also poking fun at pomposity and indeed each other. It keeps our egos from becoming too inflated. And if we lose all that, if we do not have the ability to criticise, then where might we end up? And you may be saying, yeah, but it's okay because, you know, I can criticise who I want right now, and the people that are protected are the ones that should be protected. Fair enough. But I just worry that with this direction of travel, the aforementioned direction of travel, that within the not too distant future, strange and like a science fiction film as this may sound, but some things that are going on right now seem a little bit science fiction-y. We could find ourselves unable to criticise anyone who is deemed to be, for whatever reason, not criticisable. And that could include leaders. It could include governments. It could include individuals who are in the public eye with a lot of connections. And you might think, well, again, that's too fanciful. But I would never in a million years have imagined that we'd end up quite where we are. And yesterday was April the 1st. And a year ago in Scotland, the Hate Crime and Public Order Act 2021, but it came into force last year, it was suddenly unleashed on the public. And in one interpretation of that, in my opinion, it is possible that you, if you're in Scotland, are in your own home around the dining room table or wherever, having a conversation, and you say something that someone else deems to be out of order, deems to be worthy of reporting as some kind of hateful, stirring up of hatred thing. And if, again, you've guessed it, you are reported, the police will pay you a visit. And if nothing is found to be untoward in terms of it's criminal, in which case, yeah, that's a different thing, then it will still be recorded. It will still be on your record. And I, for one, think that that's getting really close to a thought crime, the thought police, the idea that you say something privately and maybe you regret it immediately afterwards, or maybe someone says that's wrong, and that's how you learn. But without the ability to make those mistakes, then where will people talk? They'll just go underground and form their own ultra-private groups. How do we teach people, particularly young, what is right and what's wrong without hearing what they've got to say, without demonizing them, without reporting them and getting something on the record and traumatizing them? This is the wrong way to go. And I think that we need corrective action to get back towards our ability to, as a country, have a sense of humour, to say what we think, to not do anything criminal, but also to understand that sometimes people say things and we just have to let it bounce off. We need to practice being more resilient. We have to encourage it of others as well, because if not, this could get way, way, way out of control before it gets better. Anyway, what do you think? If you are a subscriber, thank you so very much. We're getting up there in terms of the numbers, not quite there to unlock a couple of things that I want to do. So if you know anybody who would like to subscribe, please tell them about this channel and its eclectic content. And also, if you've listened to thus far and you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Please subscribe. It does make a difference. Anyway, for the moment, from me, bye for now. Has the right to control private conversations? Absolutely. They don't. And I'll come back to that idea about a private conversation in a moment. Now, to be as balanced as possible with this, I did read somewhere that one of the reasons that they were arrested is because they didn't attend an interview that they were requested to attend. However, if that is true, 6 police officers, rather than a phone call or someone turning up to say, hey, you need to attend this, or otherwise things may escalate. This seems hugely heavy-handed. It is. There's no doubt about it. The distress that that child and that family and these parents must have gone through for this so-called malicious communication is absolutely dreadful. And this also means that somehow, I think, the school must have had access to what was written in that WhatsApp group, that private group, for them to think it was malicious and contact the police. But if they had access to it, then what could have been written that was actually malicious? Well, let's watch on.